Okay, that's it. It's now recording, and I'll now take this adherent. Okay, I see we have Councillor Allison and Councillor Anderson. Councillor Bradley, I see we have Councillor Bradley. Councillor Brogan?
Present.
I see we have Councillor Brown and Councillor Buchanan. We have Councillor Burns and Calicaise. And also Councillor Callaghan. We have Councillor Campbell, Carmichael, Chalmers, Convery, Cooper, Corbett, Cowie, Craig, Devlin, and I see we have Councillor Donnelly and Councillor Dorman. We have Councillor Dryborough, Councillor Fagan, Councillor Faulkner. We have Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Fulton, Councillor Gray, Councillor Greenshields, Councillor Hamilton. We do have Councillor Harrow. Councillor Holford is there. Councillor Horn, Councillor Horsham, Councillor Hose, Councillor LeBlond, Councillor Lennon, Councillor Lockhart, Councillor Logan, Councillor Loudon, and Councillor Lowe. Councillor MacDonald, Councillor Marsh, Councillor McAdams, I see that you're there. We have the Provost, Councillor McClymont. We have Councillors McCreary, McGavigan and McGeary. McGeever, Councillor McGuigan, Councillor McLaughlin, Councillor Miller, Councillor Nealon, Councillor Nelson, Councillor Nugent, Councillor Razak, Councillor Ross, Councillor Scott, Councillor Shearer, Councillor Stevenson. Do we have Councillor Thompson? No.
No, I've put it in the message, Susan. Bear's having problems getting in. I've asked him to go into IT.
Okay, no worries. Okay. Thanks, Councillor Devlin. Councillor Walker, I see you're here. And we have Councillor Wardhaw, Councillor Wark, Councillor Watson, and finally Councillor Wilson. We also have a number of officers present, as well as the local democracy reporter, and we have Councillor Ferguson's interpreters. I'll now hand back to you, Provost.
Thank you, Susan. Can I now invite Geraldine to make a statement, please?
Thank you, Provost. I would like to remind all members at this time of the restrictions in voting on the setting of the level of council tax. Any member present who is at least 2 months in arrears with payment of council tax or has any outstanding bills for community charge poll tax must disclose this fact as soon as practicable after the start of the meeting and refrain from voting on the proposal for setting the level of council tax. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest, please? Councillor McClymont.
Thanks, Provost. It's a declaration on item 2. I am a community member of Care and Repair within the operational savings. If they are spoken about in depth, I will need to leave that part of the meeting. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor McClymont. Item 2, overall position.
Provost.
Sorry, Councillor Shearer.
Sorry to interrupt you. I am also a community director of Care and Repair, and I am in the same situation as Councillor McClymont. If Care and Repair is discussed in depth, I would also have to leave.
Thank you for that update, Councillor Shearer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item 2, overall position of revenue budget and level of local taxation 2021-2022, which is on pages 3 to 12 of your document. Can I now invite Paul Manning to speak to this report, please?
Okay. Thank you, Provost. Morning, members.
The purpose of the report that's in front of you is to update the Council in relation to capacity for investment following the financial settlement for 2021-22, to present the Council tax level for 2021-22 for approval, and present the revenue budget for 21-22, including the base budget allocations to resources for approval. Now, the first couple of sections, the 3.1, 3.2, refer and give an update on the position in terms of the financial settlement. And that's really the update that you have already had in two papers which came to the Executive Committee in January and in February. And they're covered in a bit more detail at section 4.1 on the second page of that paper. So at the start of that paragraph, it points back to the position that was taken to the Executive Committee on the 13th of January. That stated a revised savings requirement of £4.958 million. There was an updated picture that was brought to the February Executive Committee, and that updated the committee that there had been an improvement in the budget position and that there was capacity for investment in the budget of £7.633 million. Now, the table you can see at 4.2, that's table 1, halfway down the second page of the report, just recaps on that movement between those two papers to the Executive Committee. And at the foot of that table, you can see that figure, capacity for investment and budget of £7.633 million. Now, beneath that table at 4.3, and again, this was gone through in detail to the Executive Committee in February. What we tried to do was to take account of announcements that were made by the Cabinet Secretary about public sector pay policy when the financial settlement was given in Parliament, and we tried to work out what that could mean in terms of the budget that we were having to put aside for pay. And what that indicated was we would need to put aside an additional £3 million for pay budget for 2021-22. Now, what that took it to is the position that you can see in that final sentence in section 4.3. If we put aside that £3 million for pay, it is leaving a revised capacity for investment of £4.633 million. So that figure of £3 million and that capacity for investment of 4.633 are two key figures, and I'll come back to them in the recommendations. On that topic of capacity for investment, that's get into in a bit more detail at sections 4.4 and 4.5. The rest of this report assumes that consideration as to whether to invest £4.633 million is taken into account. So the figures shown in the remainder of the report include an investments line to that value, and that's what results in a balanced budget. 4.5 makes the point that if any further savings are proposed and approved, it's assumed that they would be added to that figure for investment of £4.633 million, so they'll have no net impact on the budget figure. The point that's made at 4.6 is that should members agree to invest that £4.633 million, they'll require to agree how the investments will be made. The Council will agree the details of the final investments, and they'll be reflected in the first financial reports to the Resource and Executive Committees in the new financial year. 4.7 goes on to give an update on capital grants. So this was another feature of the settlement, and again this was covered in a bit of detail to the Executive Committee back on the 10th of February. Section 4.10 picks up the progress of the budget bill through Parliament, and it makes the point there at the end of 4.10 that should culminate in the Local Government Finance Order being approved on the 10th of March this year. 4.12 makes the point that there is the possibility that there could be a change in the level of grant allocation as the budget bill process continues. If any further funds are received as part of the budget bill process, they would be brought to the Council for consideration. Section 5 addresses council tax, and it makes the point that the settlement includes funding available to those councils that implement a council tax freeze in year 2021-22. And what I'll tell you is the figures in the remainder of this report assume that that's the option that's going to be taken. So at the foot of page 5 of your papers and the top of page 6, you can see the summary of the budget position, and that comes to a figure of £795.527 million. Now, at section 7, as we always do in the budget report, we have to address the issue of council tax. So you'll see the Band D council tax figure that's proposed referenced in there. You'll also see at table 2 the proportion of properties that are in each of the council tax bands in South Lanarkshire. And that culminates at table 3 in section 8 when we break down that budget figure of £795.527 million. We show how much of that's going to be funded from government grant and how much would be funded from council tax. Now, the remainder of the paper after that goes on to touch on the consultation arrangements, the position for future years, and the duties of yourselves as members to set a budget. So if I can go back to the recommendations in the paper, which are at 2.1. So the council is asked to approve these recommendations, that the addition to the budget for the potential pay costs of £3 million be agreed, that capacity for investment of £4.633 million after taking account of those potential pay costs be noted, that the inclusion of a budget for investments, as I indicated, totalling £4.633 million be considered, that the position of the general capital grant and the specific grants that were covered in the paper be noted, that the proposed council tax freeze, which would set the council tax for Band D properties at £1,203 be approved, and that the revenue budget as outlined in the appendix be approved. So that's the presentation of the paper. Provost, I would obviously be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Paul. I am aware that elected members have had considerable time to consider proposals and have been kept advised of updates through briefings and committee process, with the opportunity to ask senior officers questions. However, given that, are there any final questions for officers, please? No, thank you so much. I have been intimated 2 amendments to the officers' recommendations. Can I ask that Councillor Ross provide his amendment to the clerk to allow it to be circulated to all members, officers via the paper function in the chat facility? I intend thereafter to ask Councillor Cooper, Alison and Brown to speak on behalf of their groups, and thereafter we will have a 10-minute recess to allow members and officers to go over the paper. Can I now ask Councillor Ross to speak to the proposals and to make statements as leader of the council? I understand that Councillor Cooper is seconding this, is that correct?
Yes, I think that's correct.
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct.
Provost, do you wish the clerk to circulate the amendment that was agreed on behalf of the cross-party budget working group prior to me making my statement?
Circulate it now, Councillor Ross. There will be a 10-minute recess at the conclusion of the various leaders' speeches to allow.
Okay, I'll continue then. Thank you very much. Provost, colleagues, this is the 4th time I have had the honour of presenting a budget to the council. I have to admit that for a while I thought this one might be the toughest yet, given the hardships the whole country has had to endure in the last year. As a council, we have faced challenges we have never faced before. We have had to step up and provide even more support than usual to our communities, working alongside community groups to reach those who needed most support. And I think I speak for every councillor here when I say how proud I am that we have been able to do so. And especially how proud I am of our magnificent workforce who have gone above and beyond the call of duty to deliver the services that our residents and businesses needed to survive the COVID pandemic. All of this extra work has come at a cost, a huge cost, at both national and local level. And I did fear that this budget would be a particularly difficult one to balance. But I am delighted to confirm today that we are in a much better position than any of us could have reasonably have expected. In fact, the budget proposals I am presenting don't just rule out the worst cuts that at one time we feared we would need to make. Rather, they provide an opportunity for us to actually invest in South Lanarkshire. And in a moment, I will outline those investments and what they will be. But first, if you will indulge me, I would like to acknowledge the efforts that have made this possible. Once again, we need to acknowledge the role of Paul Manning, our Executive Director of Finance, his team and all the other members of corporate management who have worked tirelessly throughout the last year to reduce the initial £52 million budget gap. Officers advised us they could deliver a further £5.75 million in savings through further management and operational decisions, reducing the gap to £17.5 million. And they also tabled a list of other savings options for us to consider, totalling more than £15.5 million. Now, a lot of these savings were unpalatable to every one of us, and no wonder. None of us wanted to remove breakfast and holiday clubs from our schools. They were introduced by this administration to help most disadvantaged children. None of us wanted to end free bulk uplifts, cut back on school janitors, or reduce the amount we spend repairing roads and footpaths or reducing gritting. None of us wanted to cut the funding we give to libraries or to provide leisure and culture services. But these savings options had to be put in front of us because officers had to do their job, and that meant giving us something to consider as we sought a balanced budget. Secondly, I want to thank councillors from across political groups, the Liberal Democrats, the Independent Group and the Conservative and Unionists, who came together to form the working group, and especially thanks to Margaret Cooper for chairing our meetings. This council has a good record of political groups working together to best serve our constituents, and this year I think we needed that collegiate approach more than ever. Every political group agreed to join the budget working group, with the exception of Labour. They were invited to every meeting but declined every invite. The budget group met many times and we had extensive and often robust discussions, and as a result we were able to agree our red lines, the saving options we simply could not take forward, and we were able to agree the terms of a balanced budget. It just shows what can be done when most councillors are able to put a party politics aside and forgo some easy headlines and instead work together in the best interests of their communities. I think we should also acknowledge the fact that the settlement we received from the Scottish Government was much better than any of us could have hoped for. In the spirit of consensus, I do not intend to go overly political about this, but seriously, a few months ago, who amongst us could have guessed that we would be in a very fortunate position we are in today? And all of this without having to increase the council tax, something else I know our residents will be very grateful for. As I said, I don't want to make this political, but I do think the Scottish Government have defied all expectations to come up with a good funding package for us and for all Scottish councils. Let's examine the numbers. As we outlined in our updated report presented to the Executive Committee on the 10th of February, our settlement grant represented a like-for-like increase in funding of more than £7.5 million. That was a much better position than the budget strategy we had previously been working to. In fact, it left this council more than £12.5 million better off. Which brings me to the specific proposals which are in front of you today. The Budget Working Group ruled out the sort of painful savings options that I outlined earlier. We went through them line by line and we agreed to proceed with fewer than half of them. We did this after carefully considering the results of our public consultation exercise. More than 2,000 people took part in that exercise, about 4 times the usual number, and I would like to thank everyone that took part. Your views are really important to us. It was clear that local residents do not oppose all savings options, especially where efficiencies can be made without having a serious impact on frontline services. So the cross-party working group agreed to take forward some of the options presented by officers, totalling almost £5.5 million. This is additional money that we can use to protect key services and it also adds to what we can invest locally. And this is what really excites me about the budget proposals I am able to put in front of you today. Despite the hardships of the last year, despite the costs we have incurred in our colossal effort to protect our local communities, despite some scaremongering about some of the savings options, we are actually in a position to invest in South Lanarkshire next year. I am proud to tell you that our budget sets out our plans to do the following. Our children and young people are very precious to us. We have thought carefully about how we best support them in the next couple of years. So during the academic sessions 21-22 and 22-23, this council will target an initial £2.245 million investment, including £220,000 to support digital inclusion. Plus, our quantum, when known, of a further sum of £60 million recently announced by the Scottish Government for educational catch-up. This investment will be used to address the learning and well-being needs of our children and young people. We are very conscious of the particular challenges experienced by our children and young people whose early years in school education has been severely disrupted despite the committed and creative efforts of our educational resources. We understand that the impact often falls unequally and potentially most significantly on those already experiencing disadvantage. Our education team will engage in a meaningful way with our schools, children, young people, parents, carers, as well as the wider community to design a range of targeted initiatives to address educational inequalities and to improve the life chances of pupils in South Lanarkshire. We will also invest in an ambitious £3 million programme designed to get South Lanarkshire's economy working. This investment will cover three areas. Our social enterprise and business support programme will provide exciting and vital investment in our local communities and focus on the development of social enterprises, creating local jobs and investment opportunities. It will help promote a global South Lanarkshire programme supporting local companies and social enterprises to continue to connect with potential markets. It will also promote links to apprenticeship and young person guarantee programmes, employment and training opportunities for young people, Lanarkshire, and link more broadly to the Council's community wealth building ambitions. Secondly, we will bring forward a high-profile Locate in South Lanarkshire programme to be delivered over 2 years. The fund will enable South Lanarkshire Council to be more proactive in identifying and securing appropriate and sustainable inward investment to locate in South Lanarkshire, and is a key pillar of our strategy to expand on employment opportunities within South Lanarkshire area. The administration recognises the potential for significant growth in our tourism sector, and the third strand of our Get South Lanarkshire working programme will support the establishment and initial 3-year running cost of a membership-led tourism cooperative to develop and promote the tourism offer in South Lanarkshire. Greater promotion of our accessible outdoor activities, including cycling, walking, sports, linked to our world-class historical and cultural offers, will provide a significant increase in employment opportunities, support economic recovery, and encourage economic renewal within our communities. Despite the focus on COVID pandemic, the climate change emergency remains one of the biggest, if not the greatest, challenge we face. In recognition of this Council's ambition to become a net zero carbon authority and for South Lanarkshire to be an exemplar area where renewable technologies, industries and ultimately jobs are delivered, we will now create a £2 million fund to enable our Climate Change Committee to prioritise match funding for external funding applications, specifically linked to the UK and Scottish Government Green Economy and Green Jobs programme. Over the past year, the response of our communities, local organisations and third sector to the pandemic has been truly outstanding, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of all of us in offering our thanks to volunteers and organisations who have been and still are involved in supporting our communities. This administration is fundamentally committed to empowering the communities of South Lanarkshire, and we are announcing a series of investments that will support the development of community plans and priorities. Our communities are already leading the way on food growing, and in recognition of the importance of food security and sustainable food growth, we propose to invest £300,000 in a food strategy support fund, utilised over 2 years to support the creation of community food growing initiatives. We will work with a network of community organisations to facilitate land lease, community asset transfer or land acquisition where necessary, and support a wide range of community programmes that support access to healthy, locally grown and affordable produce. This investment will contribute to education, intergenerational and socialisation and physical health outcomes, and links with the Council's food security, food growing and community wealth building strategies. Secondly, we will deliver an additional £2 million ring-fenced investment in the Roads Capital Programme to support footpath and carriageway improvements. The predominant focus of the investment will be on footway improvement, and this further sum will be allocated across the 4 administrative areas on the basis of network length and be subject to an online participatory budgeting exercise, allowing communities to prioritise where the additional expenditure in their area should be targeted. Thirdly, we are committed to facilitating community ownership of public assets and supporting communities to use these assets for social and economic benefits. We will establish a £250,000 fund to support a dynamic community asset transfer programme. The approach to this work will be proactive and seek out sustainable asset transfer opportunities. And finally, we will provide an initial fund of £259,000 to equip local organisations and volunteers in supporting their communities. During COVID, we witnessed an eagerness by many communities to become more involved. This fund will help support participation in environmental projects and other local priorities, such as the winter gritting of footpaths. Provost, we note that this comprehensive and progressive set of revenue investments complements the General Services Programme brought to the Executive Committee in November and the HRA Capital Programme brought to members today. This Council will invest £85.2 million for General Services and £100.8 million for HRA in the sessions 21-22. This substantial programme represents our absolute commitment to the people of South Lanarkshire to invest in their future, creating infrastructure that supports jobs, generates economic improvement and prosperity, and benefits the lives of those that live here. We are creating a compelling vision for rebuilding South Lanarkshire after this terrible pandemic, a future that is genuinely greener, more inclusive and sustainable. Provost, I'd like to remind the Council that these capital programmes include, in 21-22, our housing investment programme will see this Council continue to work to ensure that our housing stock meets the energy efficiency standards for social housing, with a £7 million investment planned to upgrade the heating in 1,300 homes, meaning that over the last 9 years, 20,000 of our homes will have benefited from modern energy efficient heating systems. A further £3 million will also be spent on improving insulation measures. In addition, an investment of £73 million is being made in over 500 new homes that are due for completion. These are being built to high energy efficiency standards, which include well-insulated floors, walls and roofs, together with energy efficient heating systems and glazing. We have a continued investment of £13 million in roads, carriageways, associated infrastructure improvements and bridges, and a further £8 million of investment to finalise the early years 1140 hours programme, which will see nursery provision across the authority increased to 1,140 hours for every child. There is a continuation of the Glasgow City Region City Deal programme, which will see further investment of £24 million across our roads and education infrastructure. Investment of £3 million in early years and school sectors to manage the growth in pupil numbers related to population growth and significant new housing development across the council area. As I said at the start of my comments, I never hoped to be in a position today when I would be posing such a positive budget. But here it is. Thanks to the efforts of our officers and those elected members who took part in the budget group, we were able to rule out those savings options that we and our constituents found most unacceptable. We have a balanced budget. We have been able to accept the call from the Scottish Government to freeze council tax, and we have a programme of investments that will tackle some of the most immediate and worst impacts of COVID. Investments that will help protect the education and well-being of our children. Investments that will provide a much-needed boost to our businesses and local economy and to our tourist industry. And investments that will enable our communities to build on the fantastic resilience demonstrated and ready to emerge stronger from the difficult months that lie behind us and those still to come. It has been a tough, dark year, so I am immensely proud to present this budget, a positive, forward-looking budget that will help South Lanarkshire bounce back and face the future with hope and genuine optimism. Provost, I'm pleased to commend this comprehensive, ambitious and forward-looking budget on behalf of this administration to the Council. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Ross. Thank you. Can I now invite Councillor Cooper, followed by Councillor Allison, and thereafter Councillor Brown to speak on behalf of their groups, please. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Provost, and I confirm that I second Councillor Ross's amendment. This council is about to pass a cross-party budget that will help people right across South Lanarkshire. That is down to the fact that 4 of the 5 political groups decided to put our constituents before politics. It's the second year I've chaired the cross-party budget working group, and I'd like to thank the officers for their support in the process, and I'm grateful for the professional and sincere approach taken by all the leaders, deputy leaders and councillors who were involved. The talks were tough. Everyone felt strongly about certain issues and argued hard for the points they and their groups hold dear. However, we all came to the table with an open mind and an open book and no predetermined conditions and proceeded from there. Each of the 4 groups may have significant differences, but we all wanted to get the very best possible outcome for everyone in our communities. Like Oliver Twist, we wanted more from the Scottish Government settlement. We want to see this year's freeze in council tax baselined next year and not to be a 1-year windfall. And we want a guarantee of a settlement for the future that will not see us faced with brutal cuts over the next 5 years. We are well aware this is an election year for the Scottish Parliament, and it would be naive to think that this year's settlement does not reflect that. We need to continue to work with COSLA to achieve a fair settlement every year. The fight against poverty and a fair, responsible living wage for the lowest paid in public service must go on. However, unlike the main opposition group, instead of trying to get some publicity by scaring people with stories of potential cuts to our frontline services, the 4 groups who worked together chose to be responsible, to do the hard work of finding ways to avoid such cuts. That took guts. It wasn't easy. There were times when I thought as chair we might not find a way through. But while the main opposition group abandoned its responsibility to try to solve problems and protect services, the rest of us dug deep, consulted and reconsulted our groups, and proudly we delivered. The independent group prioritised education as well as community and enterprise. The resources that maintain our roads, pavements, parks, cemeteries and open spaces, carry out our winter gritting and deliver on social enterprise. All of those things are achieved in this budget. We were determined this council should keep providing free nursery places from a child's third birthday. We made it very clear the independent group could not support going back to the birthday discrimination that saw so many children having to wait months for the next term, falling behind their peers, all of this at the most crucial stage of their young development. This budget protects Free at 3, benefiting young children and their families. It invests in helping local businesses as they struggle through the hardest times in living memory. It helps kids and youngsters get back on track after more than a year of severe disruption to their education and social development. And it delivers the promise to head teachers of local needs being met based on their local needs. It finds good money for climate change, getting South Lanarkshire back to work, and much more. The independent group are certain it shows why local politicians should work with others, focus on what matters to residents, and not play silly political games. We took the time and made the effort to fight for our public services instead of the easy option of refusing to even try. We found solutions, we protected services, we didn't just moan about cuts, we actually stopped them from happening. This budget is a good one, and everyone involved in delivering it can look our constituents in the eye and say we put them first. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Allison.
Thank you very much, Provost. I don't intend to use quite as many words as the last two speakers. But firstly, I actually do concur with where John started in thanking the staff for the support that they have given, not just through this process, but through the whole COVID epidemic and ongoing, whether that be frontline staff or in Almada Towers, if you like. It's not unknown for me to get an email between 9 and 10 at night, and that shows quite a commitment from staff. Moving on to the particular working group, I actually think it's a duty that we have as councillors to take part in discussions and to represent our constituents who have honoured us with their vote and ensuring that their views are given, particularly within a budget process. That has culminated in, I think, a very forward-looking budget that has tackled many of the areas, and I'm just going to cover them very quickly, particularly the likes of education, where we've refocused spending to be able to deal with COVID, where we look at our winter and the resilience that has been required. They are both putting money in to support local communities and the roads and pavements that will have been severely damaged. Yes, we're looking forward to climate change funding from both the UK government and the Scottish government to be able to help us in these projects as well. So being able to add to that is very much part of it. But I think it's also very important that we help our businesses recover. Someone used the title, Getting South Lanarkshire Working, I think was the title. And I think that is very, very important. Changes are going to come after COVID. We are not going to go back. It's going to be what we'll call a new normal. And that will be very important to support where we can. We have all had to, I think, compromise a great deal to be able to get this. I don't think any of us will claim that everything in this paper or this amendment is what we would all have been wanting. But it does show the importance of these discussions in that we have come to a consensus that can take us forward. We have a package there of new programmes which are very much welcome. That is basically down to, yes, a budget increase of approximately 1% rather than the deduction that we were originally working on. But what I would like us all to remember is that 1% reduction increase in our budget was paid for by a 9% increase in the Scottish Government budget. So once again, the percentage of the Scottish budget coming to councils has been cut, and that is what is putting pressure on frontline services. COSLA, as has already been indicated, has argued strongly that local government has to be fully supported, and I would urge all of us who are representatives on COSLA to continue putting these arguments forward. Because if we had got the same percentage of the Scottish Government budget today that we got 14 years ago, we would have needed no cuts and would have been able to significantly increase the investment package that we could have put in front of you today. So with the willingness to compromise, we are able to support this budget, this forward-looking budget, and will be supporting it today. And thank you all for your contributions and willingness to negotiate these points. And with these comments, I'll finish. Provost, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Allison. Can I ask Councillor Brown, please?
Thank you very much indeed, Provost. And can I begin, as others have done, by thanking the officials for all their support through this. I mean, Paul Manning and his team prepare these complicated financial projections and figures. He described it to me once as being arithmetic, or mere arithmetic, and I think that's perhaps, to say the least, a little bit of an understatement of what the achievement is in terms of making these things available to us and comprehensible to us as non-accountants, if you like. I'd also like to thank colleagues in the other groups as well for their contribution towards this budget. And to mark, I think, the leader's comment as well, that we're not just doing new things, if you like, or different things in terms of the changes in the budget, but we are completing and continuing to provide the services that people rely on the council for, and moving towards things like the completion of the 1124 hours for early years, which is so important in this context. Now, with those introductory remarks, I'd like to support the cross-party amendment to the budget on behalf of the Liberal Democrats. These are difficult times, not just with COVID, but with Brexit and with the general uncertainty of our constitutional future. So it is very good that South Lanarkshire can rise to the challenge, get across party divides together, and develop a budget that, within the inevitable constraints of a finite budget, meets the needs of the moment. It's a very great pity that the Labour Party saw fit, presumably to enable them to get publicity by gurning from the sidelines, to absent themselves from the discussions and, dare I say it, from their duty to their communities. And consequently, they have had no influence or input whatsoever to this budget. Liberal Democrats had one overarching aim in approaching the budget, which was to support, as best we could, our local area's recovery from the coronavirus emergency. We're now rather inured to the extraordinary damage it has caused, the restrictions on our way of life, the devastation to our local businesses, large and small, the personal illness and loss, the fear, the disruption of the lives of our children and young people in particular. But in truth, it has been an event like no other in the lifetimes of most of us. Now, the pandemic has led to unprecedented support from the UK and Scottish governments, not perhaps as much in harmony as they should have been, but nevertheless delivering the major stabiliser of the furlough scheme and the other business and community support schemes as well, and what is proving to be the considerable logistics success of the vaccine programme. Our council has led, as has been said, a tremendous effort to keep local services going, to adapt the way that education and community care operated, and to work with volunteers across the country in supporting communities. Much of what was done was thought unimaginable before. Now we have to build on these foundations as we move at last into what we all hope will be a genuine and long-lasting recovery phase. The savings we've jointly made and the efficiency the officers have delivered have provided us with finance to invest in supporting recovery. Above all, with our COVID Education Recovery Fund of over £2 million, focused on whatever is necessary to rebuild the chances of South Lanarkshire's children, whether by way of extra tuition, digital inclusion, a greater investment in outdoor education, or support for those who have lost out most over the last year. There's no one magic bullet, but we know that both the staff and the young people are up for it. But the local economy too has suffered the biggest decline on record, and many small businesses face the future with great uncertainty and foreboding. We have agreed a substantial Get South Lanarkshire Working Fund. We need to use it wisely. In the view of the Liberal Democrats, the main focus has to be on our Indigenous companies, not on so much on so-called inward investment. There are likely, in fact, to be huge opportunities. People will be holidaying at home in this country in the immediate future, so there'll be light at the end of the tunnel for tourism and hospitality businesses. There will be a considerable expansion in green jobs to meet the global climate challenge that the leader talked about. The push for successful vaccines may lead to opportunities in research and production of medical products. There will be opportunities for local manufacture and supply in a number of fields. And we must be well geared to support our local economy and our local businesses in taking up these possibilities. And all this will need local businesses to adapt and to evolve, to be helped through change into new fields of endeavour. The Council must use its resources, its staff and its skills as flexibly and innovatively as possible to support this recovery. Part of this is the accelerating programmes to tackle climate change, electrification of transport, retrofitting of more energy efficient houses, renewable energies and all the rest of it. So the climate change fund of £2 million called for by Liberal Democrats last year has been delivered this year and should help to ratchet up the value of anticipated investment in this area by the UK and Scottish governments. And finally, there's the issue of pavements. Pavement politics, as we all know, is the speciality of all good Liberal Democrats. There's no formal survey of the overall condition of our pavements, but anyone doing our statutory exercise walk around our local communities cannot but be aware of the deteriorating condition of the footpaths, just at a time when local walking and cycling are important as never before. We have invested successfully in our roads, and investment should now pivot to improving our pavements and paths. Liberal Democrats were keen to see these new recovery funds guaranteed for 2 or 3 years, because we're kidding ourselves if we think this is a sticking plaster job for just a few months. There is scope for that because the savings and investments we've provided for are largely baseline for future years, subject to the outcome of the COSLA discussions with the Scottish Government. Colleagues felt unable to agree to that at this stage because of the uncertainty of funding for local government in years to come, but I believe nevertheless we'll need to make provision for this next year. That leads me, however, to my final point, which is the continued unsustainability of and pressure on local government funding, which Alison indeed talked about earlier. Even in this year of relative largesse from Westminster, the Scottish Government still cannot pass on its proper share of funding to support vital council services. This situation cannot continue. In the years to come, council services, not least the so-called non-statutory services, will be more important than ever before in supporting people, families and communities with the quality of life and opportunity they require. Nor is it desirable, actually, that the Scottish Government continues to freeze the council tax and to make national decisions on council tax levels, damaging the independence and flexibility of local government. Preface with those comments, this is a good budget. It matches the challenges we face and it provides a solid basis for us to rebuild. It is, from my perspective, a very Liberal Democrat budget, which I'm very glad to recommend to colleagues and to the citizens of South Lanarkshire for approval. Let us now go forward and make every penny count in creating these new opportunities for our people as we revive our economy and come out of the coronavirus emergency. Thank you very much indeed, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. I was intending having a 10-minute recess. Are members agreeable to that, or do they just want to continue with business?
Provost, I would be content to proceed without the recess if it is for my benefit. But if it's for the benefit of other members, I have no objection to it. I'm content to proceed just now and perhaps have a recess afterwards if you were agreeable.
Okay. Are we agreed, members?
Yes.
Okay.
Agreed. Recess.
Agreed.
Thank you so much. Okay, I've advised that the second amendment is from Councillor Fagan. Do you have a seconder, Councillor Fagan?
Yes, Councillor Convery will be seconding my amendment.
Could I ask you to provide the amendment to the clerk to allow it to be circulated, please?
It has indeed been provided, and I gather will be circulated shortly in the course of my comments.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, if you just give a couple of minutes, understand some members couldn't get it through the share facility, so I'll just email that, Provost.
Okay, thank you. Okay, can I now ask Councillor Fagan to speak on his amendment, please?
Well, thank you, Provost. This year had to be different because when we were faced with the cuts presented to us at the end of last year, we were faced with cuts no progressive council would ever want to consider. The public have to know the reality of the decisions before this council, because it's public pressure and pressure from trade unions, campaigners and ultimately voters that can correct the historic underfunding of council services under this SNP government, which I remind the council is £900 million in real terms since 2017. I respect the decision of other parties to enter into cross-party talks this year. We have entered into cross-party talks in previous years. But I also think people out there would respect why Labour did not participate this year. We said we would only enter talks if cuts to breakfast clubs, lunch clubs and free at three early years provision, which has cross-party support in this council, were ruled out from the very start. Neither the leader of the council or the chair of those talks would agree, and those cuts have therefore been hanging over South Lanarkshire for 2 months. Now, the talks that have taken place have produced a budget. I have taken a look at the budget information that has been shared. Can I say, Provost, less than half of the £10 million of new spending in this budget is in fact new. The gap is bridged with excessive cuts, more than £5 million to people's services. The £2 million Education Recovery Fund appears to be funded through £2 million of education cuts. The work of the cross-party group on leisure has been preempted. The council couldn't deliver IT savings from last year, and this appears to propose more. And there is nothing new for the council's workforce, with concerns raised by our local government unions apparently ignored. Cross-party budget, however well-intentioned, appears to have fallen apart in minutes, and I think I would agree then with earlier speakers that it would have benefited from Labour's participation. Now, councils have to make choices, and there are elements of this budget we can commend, as I'm sure others can commend elements of what I am about to propose. But as ever, if our funding settlement matched what was necessary, we could do so much more. I am today pressing an amendment which has been lodged with officers. Labour's alternative budget also achieves £10 million of new investment, and it does so while limiting savings to less than half of what is currently being proposed by the other parties and reprofiling the benefit of the Loans Fund review. It means we can invest more in South Lanarkshire now, when our people need us most. And this is how we'll do it. Labour are proposing today a £250 bonus for the council's pandemic workforce. That's all council workers, including South Lanarkshire leisure and culture workers on grade 4 or below, who are not recipients of the Scottish Government's £500 thank you payment announced last year, which I understand some people have still to receive. Our intention is to provide a pro rata payment for all those council workers who went above and beyond, and I associate myself with the kind words that have been said about them today. That includes people who collected bins, paid lifeline grants to businesses, were digging graves and supported families with bereavement. And with a fairer settlement, we could do more. Double the payment, match the £500 bonus, and Labour will continue to campaign for the resources that allow us to do so. To show our gratitude to care workers, we propose that from now on the council pays the SSSC registration fees for all workers on grade 2 or below, a better deal for key workers, an ambition of our trade unions and an ambition that will be met by Labour. For years, our frontline services have been stretched. We want to invest more on a sustained basis, yet there is real uncertainty around this year's government grant settlement, which provides less than half the additional revenue councils asked for. We would therefore ask the CMT to develop proposals to strengthen core services and support recovery, whether that's maintenance or grounds or education. And with a better deal, we could do more. We could sustain and we could grow that fund and divert more resources into the front line. And I say we can do more now. We estimate that a fair settlement would have provided at least £1.2 million more in capital grant in this year. The total grant increase was a derisory £60,000. Labour would therefore transfer almost £1.5 million of revenue to capital, and that could be spent on footways or play parks or facilities. It could be invested in the fabric of our communities, and we will task the CMT with bringing proposals to the Executive Committee, and we can do more. We are committing £220,000 to economic development to meet the staffing costs for posts funded by the West of Scotland Loan Fund monies, that can be integrated into the core budget, and it allows the loan fund monies to be ring-fenced for economic development, brought forward and reinvested in the economy now, and we can do more. In 2019, when cuts imposed on this council forced us to choose between free at three nursery provision and expanding free school meals, we knew we couldn't do both, and we chose to put the early years first. This year, the council has the resources to both protect free at three and expand free school meals, yet the SNP budget does not do so. So we will. With all main Holyrood parties committed to expanding free school meals in the next Parliament, we anticipate universal provision throughout primary from August of next year. To expand provision this year, Labour will bring eligibility up to primary 7 in line with the school clothing grant. That would mean 1,100 more children receiving a free school meal. And I say to SNP backbenchers, if they are serious about expanding provision, this really does mean something to them, then vote with us today instead of voting for a budget that puts the price of school meals up. And we can do more. Labour will commit £1.9 million to introduce free school meals for primary 4 and 5, not from August of next year, but from August of this year. And with a fair deal from the SNP government, we could go even further and deliver free school meals for primary 6 and primary 7 too. We said we would do it if we had the resources then. We have the resources now, so let the SNP vote with us and let's do it. So this is Labour's budget, a fairer budget that delivers for key workers, invests in the front line and invests in the future. And still, we can do more. Because those whose needs are greatest already receive free school meals, we want to go further for them. The cost of this pandemic hit those with the greatest needs hardest. And for that reason, Labour are this year committing £1.3 million to a top-up payment paid alongside the school clothing grant. Labour will provide an additional £100 to all those who qualify for the school clothing grant and help those who need us most. And we will do all of it with no cuts to breakfast clubs, no cuts to lunch clubs, no cuts to free at three, no cuts to gritting, no cuts to grounds, no cuts to footways or roads, no cuts to flood prevention, no cuts to libraries, no cuts to arts, no cuts to daycare transport, no cuts to psychological services, no cuts to class size support, and no cuts to school transport. This is a better budget. It's Labour's alternative, and it's one we ask the whole council to endorse today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fagan. Thank you, Councillor Fagan. If members are agreeable, I intend now have a 10-minute. Sorry, Councillor Convery, do you want to?
No, Chair, I endorse everything that Councillor Fagan has just said. It's a progressive budget, it's a Labour budget, and I would reserve the right to come back in if we open up to debate later on, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor
Thank
Convery.
you.
As previously said, I intend now to have a 10-minute recess if members are agreeable, and thereafter I'll allow you to look at the Councillor Fagan's amendment, and thereafter we can have a discussion. Let's resume at 12:15, if you're agreeable. Thank you.
Agreed.
I don't intend asking for a federant because the clerk will take the list of the participants. So if we're all happy to resume, let's start again. So can I ask if there are any more amendments, please? Councillor Loudon.
Sorry, no, that was just in response. It's not a further amendment.
No, thank you so much. Okay, can I ask members if anyone is moving the officers' recommendations? Okay, now can I ask if members wish to debate the amendments or move to the vote? Do we wish to debate?
Move to vote.
Move to vote.
Move to vote. Well, can I have a show of hands then, please? Those who wish to move to the vote.
Provost, indicatively there are 39 hands for the vote, which would give you a majority.
Okay, so 39 members wish to move to the vote. We have two amendments. In front there are two amendments. Councillor Ross's amendment is now regarded as the motion, and Councillor Fagan is the amendment. If we're happy to go to the vote, can I ask Susan to start that process, please?
Thank you, Provost. As outlined by the Provost, the motion is by Councillor Ross, seconded by Councillor Cooper, and that has been circulated. And the amendment has also been circulated, and that's by Councillor Fagan, seconded by Councillor Convery. When I read out your name, could you please indicate whether you would wish to vote for the motion or the amendment? And just to advise that Councillor Corbett has now submitted her apologies because she has an appointment to go to. Councillor Allison?
Motion.
Councillor Anderson?
Motion.
Councillor Bradley?
Motion.
Councillor Brogan?
Amendment.
Councillor Brown?
Motion.
Councillor Buchanan?
Motion.
Councillor Burns? Councillor Burns? I'll come back to Councillor Burns. Councillor Callaghan?
Motion.
Councillor Callaghan?
Motion, thanks.
Councillor Campbell?
Motion.
Councillor Carmichael?
Amendment.
Councillor Chalmers?
Motion.
Councillor Convery?
Amendment.
Councillor Cooper? Councillor Cooper? She looks present. Councillor Cooper? I'll come back to Councillor Cooper. Councillor Cowie?
Amendment.
Councillor Craig?
Motion.
Councillor Devlin?
Amendment.
Councillor Donnelly?
Motion.
Councillor Dorman?
Motion.
Councillor Dryborough?
Motion.
Councillor Fagan?
Amendment.
Councillor Faulkner?
Amendment.
Councillor Ferguson?
Motion.
Thank you. Councillor Fulton?
Motion.
Was that motion? Sorry, Councillor Fulton?
Yeah, motion, yes.
Okay. Councillor Gray?
Motion.
Councillor Greenshields?
Motion.
Councillor Hamilton?
Amendment.
Councillor Harrow?
Motion.
Councillor Holford?
Motion.
Councillor Horn?
The motion.
Councillor Horsham?
Motion.
Councillor Hose?
Motion.
Councillor LeBlond?
Motion.
Councillor Lennon?
Amendment.
Councillor Lockhart?
Motion.
Councillor Logan?
Amendment.
Councillor Loudon?
Motion.
Councillor Lowe? Councillor Lowe? I'll come back to Councillor Lowe. Councillor MacDonald?
Motion.
Councillor Marsh?
Motion.
Councillor McAdams?
Amendment.
Councillor McAllen?
Motion.
Councillor McClymont?
Amendment.
Councillor McCreary?
Motion.
Councillor McGavigan?
Motion.
Councillor McGeever?
Motion.
Councillor McGuigan?
Motion.
Councillor McLaughlin?
Amendment.
Councillor Miller.
Motion.
Councillor Nealon.
Motion.
Councillor Nelson.
Motion.
Councillor Nugent.
Motion.
Councillor Razak.
Amendment.
Councillor Ross.
Motion.
Councillor Scott.
Amendment.
Councillor Shearer.
Motion.
Councillor Stevenson.
Motion.
Councillor Thompson. Sorry, I think there's some interference on the line. Somebody's.
Could I ask everyone, if you're not speaking, to mute, please? Thank you.
Councillor Thompson. I'll come back to Councillor Thompson. Councillor Walker. Oh, okay. Thanks, Councillor Thompson.
Thank you.
Councillor Walker.
Amendment.
Councillor Wardhall.
Motion.
Councillor Ward.
Motion.
Councillor Watson.
Motion.
Councillor Wilson.
Motion.
Yeah, I'm just going to run through. Councillor Burns.
Margaret Cooper's tried to get in. She's actually put a note on the
chat.
chat
I see that. Thanks, Councillor Watson. I noticed that. Do we have Councillor Burns? Okay, I don't have a message from Councillor Burns. Obviously, my number's there that he could text. And just to check, do we have Councillor Lowe?
Motion. Motion.
All right, thanks, Councillor Lowe. Okay. Okay, I'll just tally up then.
Could I ask everybody to put their hands down, please? Thank you.
Okay, we've got 45 for the motion and 17 for the amendment. The motion is therefore declared carried.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. Thank you all very much for your participation in this crucial issue, this crucial piece of business for the Council. Thank you so much. We now move on to item 3, recommendations referred by the Executive Committee, Housing, Revenue and Capital and Account Budget 2021-22, report to be tabled. Can I invite the clerk to circulate his paper via the paperclip function in the chat facility, please? I'll allow you a couple of minutes to look at it. And also could ask you to put your hands down if you don't wish to speak. Thank you.
That should be at Provost in the shared file and also by email.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Razak, your hand's still up. Councillor Greenshields, your hand's still up. Finally, Councillor Wilson.
Yes, I'd like to say a few words on the housing budget, if that's okay, Provost.
Okay. Could allow me to just ask if there are any questions for Danny Lowe first? If not, Councillor Wilson can go ahead. Any questions for Danny Lowe? No. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Provost, and it's a pleasure to speak on this agenda item on today's agenda. Firstly, I'd like to take the opportunity to recognise the work of the Tenants Budget Scrutiny Group. Over the past few months, I've been working in partnership with officers to consult with tenants and contribute to the development of the proposals within this paper. The proposals presented in the paper this morning to members are a demonstration of our commitment to continuing to invest in improving our housing stock, with just under £101 million of investment being proposed in all this, whilst keeping rent levels amongst the lowest in the country. In this year's budget, we're proposing to increase the supply of council housing in South Lanarkshire with a further 504 homes planned for completion next year. With the help of grant funding from the Scottish Government, these homes are all being built to the highest quality and energy efficiency standards. This not only helps protect the planet through reducing carbon emissions, but it also helps reduce the running costs for households too. Where homes do need to be adapted to meet the particular needs of families moving in, we're doing that also. We're continuing to invest in there's an echo there. We'll continue to invest in improving our existing housing stock to ensure that our homes exceed the Scottish housing quality standard. And we'll make sure they're warm and comfortable too, and we'll do our bit to protect the planet through meeting the energy efficiency standards. We'll do this through, as John touched on earlier, investing over £7 million to upgrade the heating systems in 1,300 homes. There's a further £3 million planned to improve insulation and £4.5 million pounds for improving external fabric of our homes. There's also £1 million of investment planned for new kitchens and bathrooms. In the budget for the year ahead, we've had to make the provision for the impact of welfare reform and universal credit and the impact that that's had on rent collection and arrears. As a consequence, a provision of £6.22 million has been made to cover the bad debt provision. As a council, though, we're working with individuals in arrears and taking a person-centred approach to recovery, which is tailored to their specific circumstances. We're also providing financial support where it's appropriate through, for example, discretionary housing payments and the tenancy sustainment fund that we've put in place. To meet all of these commitments, we need additional funding through increased rents. That said, we recognise and appreciate the continued financial uncertainty that many of our tenants are facing as a result of the pandemic. And as a result of this, during the consultation process, we reduced the planned level of rent increase from 3.75% to 2.2%. To keep that in context, though, I would note that based on the 2019-20 Scottish Housing Charter returns, South Lanarkshire has still the 7th lowest rents of all local authority landlords in Scotland, and we've got the lowest by far rents of all social landlords based in South Lanarkshire. Earlier I highlighted the consultation with tenants that takes part on the development of the proposals being put forward today, and I'd note the feedback that we received from both the Budget Scrutiny Group and the Tenant Participation Coordination Group. They've confirmed that they are fully supportive of the proposed rent increase, recognising that this is considerably lower than the 3.95% increase in the previous 3 years. They also consider it to be fair and allows us to continue to invest in the current and new housing stock. There was also a positive response from the 1,385 online survey returns. They showed that 74% of participants agreed that rents were either good or very good value for money, and 90% strongly agreed with their investment priorities. So to sum it up, Provost, all of the investment that's planned will make South Lanarkshire a better place to live, and not just for our tenants, but for our communities too, helping them thrive with neighbours that can take genuine pride in the homes that they live. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions or comments, please? Are we agreed with the recommendations?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. Now we move on to item 4, notice of motion. Plug the gap. A notice of motion has been received in terms of standing order number 19 on the 24th of December 2020. Can invite Councillor Fagan to speak to this notice of motion. I understand it seconded by Councillor Convery. Is that correct?
It is indeed, Provost, and given the length of the previous debate, which I think touched on some of the issues that are raised in this motion, I don't propose to speak for very long. All I will say is that back in December, the joint trade unions made an approach to all leaders to table a motion in support of the Plug the Gap campaign. This was a joint approach, even though the campaign itself is fronted by Unison. It is a Unison campaign. The budget debate, as I say, preempts much of what this motion was lodged to address, but I do think it's important to make the point that the Scottish budget has yet to complete its passage through Holyrood. So while I think the issue of fiscal flexibilities, which continues to be topical, was much more topical in December, it's still the case, I think it's we heard from all the other leaders, that there is concern about the historic underfunding of councils. The campaign the council is asked to support and associate itself with is a campaign that essentially boils down to 4 points, and some in which it has to be said this council over many years has made progress on. So the first point, of course, is to reward local government workers. I'll say no more. The second point is to secure the long-term financial sustainability of local government, which I think is the real point that came out of the budget debate. Whichever way we voted on that motion, this is a common concern for all of us. The third is to ensure that local government is shaped and is fit for a post-pandemic future, and that there's a lot of talk of building back better, but actually our public services are critical to how we do that. And the fourth point, which we are asked to associate the council with, is that there is full consolidation of the living wage. And I think on that point, South Lanarkshire is and has been for some time in a better position than other authorities. But nonetheless, I think as solidarity with council workers length and breadth of Scotland, I think it only makes sense that the council should be associating itself with that. So the campaign, the motion in itself is simply an invitation to associate ourselves, which what I think is a very progressive and trade union campaign, and one that is appropriate for the moment in which we find ourselves in just now.
Thank you, Councillor Fagan. I'm now inviting questions or comments. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Provost, and forgive me for contributing again so soon after my initial contribution. It is worth noting, and Joe alluded to in his statement, and it's through no fault of him or the seconder of the motion, that it is out of date and fails to take account of the additional funding provided to local authorities by the Scottish Government. Last week, in contrary to what opposition parties have been saying today, Scotland's local authorities will receive an increase in revenue funding over the course of the next year. Spice, the Scottish Parliament's Information Centre, which is often quoted rightfully so in these debates, highlighted in their briefing that the combined general revenue grant and the non-domestic rate income figure increases by just short of 2% in cash terms next year. And once specific ring-fenced resource grants are included, then the combined figure for the resource budget increases by around 2.5% in cash terms next year. And there's been a lot of debate about the additional funding from Westminster, as has been discussed in the previous debate. However, once health funding is discounted, the Scottish Government's resource budget has in fact reduced for the remainder of the fiscal resource budget. And despite that, local authorities have received an increase in year, which has allowed us to do much more than ever. And for the sake of brevity, I won't rehearse the debate that we've just had. Look, I'm sure I speak for everybody in the call when we say that we want more money for local government. I want more money for housing, to tackle poverty and to mitigate Tory welfare cuts. But until we've got all the fiscal levers at our disposal to grow our economy, then it appears to be a more difficult argument to make. However, the Finance Secretary has said, and she said in the budget debate, that if the Labour Party have a solution that will increase the funding to local authorities without cutting other budgets, then they should offer that. And there's still time to do it, and I'm sure the door will remain open to them. That said, there's several things within the motion that we agree with, and I'll put on record once again our appreciation for the hard work and dedication of council staff throughout the pandemic. They have, as has been pointed out time and time again, be the unsung heroes of the pandemic. And I know that there are discussions ongoing around an additional day's holiday for staff as a recognition of their hard work, and we welcome that. However, overall, it appears that the government, the Scottish Government, have done much with what they have, and the SNP administration at the council welcome it. We welcome the additional funding for local government, the record investment in the National Health Service, and in our recovery from the pandemic. And for those reasons, we'll be voting against the motion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll now take Councillor Allison.
Thank you, Provost. I was really concerned there for a minute because I thought I was almost agreeing with Josh, and that did make me feel very uncomfortable. But he managed to slip in there the bit about Tory cuts. I would just like to remind them that if the Scottish Government had passed on all the money they had got from Westminster, there would have been no cuts, and therefore it was different. Plug the gap. The 4 different points, there is no disagreement with points 2 and 3. They're fairly straightforward. It is a fairly empty document, to be quite honest, behind the times. Point 1 does concern us because that payment that was made to health and social care workers was very disruptive, discriminatory, and not really seemed to be more a political statement than out to help anyone. We have had a great deal of work contributed by our staff members, and we would like to see a day's extra holiday. And I realise that it's not an original idea and it was first suggested by someone else, but we would like to put that forward instead of a discriminatory payment, some getting it, some not, some getting part of it. The final point, we're already paying at council level the full living wage. So why have that point in at all? We are not a legislative body for Scotland. That's for discussion elsewhere, how it's taken forward. So I would like to put in an amendment to this, that point 1 is changed to offering a day's extra annual leave for all council staff in 2022 after the pandemic is over, so that they can take full advantage of it, and to drop point 4 altogether, leaving 2 and 3 where they are. Thank you.
Councillor Allison, do you have a second of your amendment?
I think I have.
Yeah, sorry, Provost, it's Councillor Graham Campbell here. I'm seconding that.
Thank you. Could I ask Councillor Convery now to speak?
Yeah, thanks very much, Provost. It's just quite sad. It's less than half an hour ago and the alliances all split asunder. So when the people of South Lanarkshire listen to this later on, they'll see the real party that worries and cares about them. All we've had has been political grandstanding for the SNP. I would remind all my colleagues, all the officers and the workforce, this is election year for the SNP, and God bloody help us in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell?
Thank you, Provost. I really don't have a lot, really, other than to support Alex's motion. I think that giving £500 extra to council workers, and while it's a very generous gesture, and it is a gesture that, you know, we should recognise the work of all of our council employees throughout the pandemic, and especially above and beyond. But I think giving an extra £500 would be a terrible message to the private sector workers, who are in the majority across Scotland, and who are suffering at the moment through this pandemic. And also to point 4, as Alex said, I would like, we want to change that item to talk about the national living wage. We have no issue with it. We believe there is a national living wage in place, and we would just like to change the words of that last item to the national living wage, not just a living wage, because there's a lot of debate what the living wage is. But there is a national living wage. It is in the statute books, and we would just like to change the phrase of that. But it's not a bad paper. It's not a bad motion. I just have issues with point 1 and 4. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Councillor Brown.
Yes, thanks very much, Provost. I think we would urge people to vote against this motion. It seems to me to be pretty thin in general terms. I think there's a bit of an issue when people just take over, outside organisations, trade unions or whatever, in terms of putting the motion in, because it's not been adapted to South Lanarkshire's situation. It's already been said, and indeed accepted by Joe, the living wage point is something which is not relevant to us in the sense we've taken it on board already. Some of the rest of it, I think I've got some issues with as well, because point 3 talks about shaping local government fit for the post-pandemic future. Now, it's an issue that arises quite often, but that is primarily an issue for this council and for local government. I don't want to see local government shaped in that fashion by central government, by the Scottish government or whoever. That's not the proper way to deal with these things. We've got perfectly acceptable powers within our own domain to adapt our workforce and our requirements in the way that seem appropriate to take that particular matter forward. Final point I'd like to make, if I may, is on the question of the long-term financial stability of local government. Now, as everybody has said, nobody in local government, I think, would doubt that the sustainability of local government has been an issue every year for many years under governments of all different stamps. There's no point in a process of loud whistling in the dark. The Scottish Government has announced its budget and the local government settlement. It's the 1 year where the settlement is necessarily more generous than usual. and it's the year of an election when the Scottish Government cannot guarantee its own existence beyond May, far less a future year's settlement either. So it does seem to me there's a good considerable amount of gesture politics in this, and pretty unconvincing even in those terms. So our advice, frankly, would be to vote against the motion. I don't frankly think it's salvageable in the way that the Conservative amendment suggests either. Thank you very much, Provost.
Thank you. Could I have Councillor Thompson followed by Councillor Cooper, please?
Hello, can you hear us okay, Provost?
I can hear you now.
Right, thank you. Now, just a quick comment, I'll make it quick. I agree with Joe and Jerry there. I think this is a chance to say thanks. I think it's a good motion. I certainly back it. Having said this, just to be observational, see if it comes through, but I've heard that the SNP have actually said in a few weeks' time they'll announce payments to the police, households and the army for all the service they've given. I think they've stolen Joe's idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Thanks, Provost. I feel this paper is outdated. It dates back to the 24th of December 2020. It's not a costed proposal either, and there have been major issues with the £500 that was announced to give to health and social care workers. That payment, many workers didn't want that because it affected their benefit level. And regrettably, they didn't take up that. At a leaders' meeting several weeks ago, I brought forward the notion of an extra day's holiday in 2022 for all council staff, and explained that this could be a doable proposition which would reward everyone in South Lanarkshire for the hard work that they put in, rather than this one-off financial payment to a small group of workers. Now, at that time, I was going to bring it as a thinking Kay McVeigh to prepare a paper on it and bring it back to us. And we await that paper coming back to the leaders' meeting and taking it forward from there. So, you know, I've got major concerns about 1 and 4. And I feel that we do have a living wage in South Lanarkshire, and we have a national living wage, and I'm sure that South Lanarkshire was always just above the national living wage. We maintained that over the peace. So I would be urging people at this particular time to vote against this paper for those reasons, and to await the outcome of discussions in rewarding all of our staff in South Lanarkshire, right down to the cleaners in the schools and our janitorial staff, etc., for all the hard work that they've put in during the pandemic, and look forward to receiving the paper from Paul Manning and Kay McVeigh on that. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions or points? Councillor Fagan, do you want to sum up?
Yes, thank you, Provost. I've got to say I'm normally very receptive to sort of the constructive and somewhat lawyerly points that usually get made by Councillor Brown and occasionally the insights of others. I have to say, though, that I really don't share any of the anxiety about this motion that is being presented. I take the point that it is dated, but I think in terms of the analysis of the motion, the preamble to the motion is dated. And I suppose if it was, if the council, if it was acceptable, I'd be quite happy to remove the preamble and just get down to the nuts and bolts of what the campaign ask actually is. And I remind councillors that we're not being asked as a council really to do anything other than show our support for a trade union, an established trade union campaign that has the support of all the joint unions here in South Lanarkshire. So if I could just take the various points. The first one simply calls for the finance settlement, and the budget hasn't completed its progress, to reward local government workers. It cites the £500 as an example. It does not ask for a £500 payment for council workers. It cites that as an example. There is an argument that the pay negotiations have still not concluded, so there is a strong argument to say we can do more I've suggested one way in which we could do more here. That's not been accepted, but there are routes through which we can do more for our local government workers, and I think that's a perfectly fair objective to be placed before the Scottish Government. The second point relates to securing the long-term financial sustainability of local government, and I don't think I actually heard in any of the contributions an objection to that, perhaps other than from Councillor Wilson. Can I simply say to Councillor Wilson, I think we all note, everyone has noted that positive movement in grant. I just refer you to what COSLA asked for and the shortfall against it, a shortfall of £362 million in revenue, £20 million in capital, and £511 million in terms of the non-recurring COVID costs that the councils across Scotland could expect to face this year. So I do think that second point has merit. The third point, I don't particularly agree with Robert Brown's interpretation that this is calling for some kind of reorganisation of local government of which we are not part. I think it is simply acknowledging the reality that roles are changing on the ground as a result of the pandemic. And the final point about full consolidation of the living wage, I think it remains a priority for our trade unions, and I think it's perfectly fair for this council to show our support for others and in other parts of the country. So if it is acceptable to the council, I'm happy to remove the preamble and maybe the word therefore, and simply say that the council is asked to support the Plug the Gap campaign and the 4 objectives. And if people are, well, that would be my proposal as a motion that is more likely to gather support. And I think the 4 points I hope have provided some reassurance about. And in that amended form, I would be content to press ahead with the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Fagan. Before we move to the vote, can I ask the Chief Executive to say a few words, please?
Thanks, Provost, and I'm going to tread very warily because this is a political motion, it's a political debate, but it's in relation to Councillor Allison's amendment. If Councillor Fagan's proposal to remove the preamble and to progress with the 4 items at the bottom is not accepted and there is to be an amendment considered, it's kind of copying the comments that Councillor Cooper had indicated. An additional day's annual leave, which both elected members suggested would be the following year, 2022. It was just to say there is no costing provided for that, and it's not just a loss of productivity in a day. There are consequences for cover, etc. that has a financial calculation behind that. So what I would suggest is you've just set your budget for 21-22. This would be a budget item you would want to consider in setting your budget for the next year. And as Councillor Cooper had indicated, officers are going to prepare a paper on that option. My advice to Council is to have that detail in front of you before you commit to providing a day's annual leave. So it's just that you have the implications of that in front of you. So first of all, Provost, it's for Councillor Allison to indicate whether he intends continuing with his amendment or whether he accepts Councillor Fagan's proposition. If he accepts the proposition, then my comments are irrelevant. If he is going forward with his amendment, if he could be clear that it is 2022 is his proposal, and that his advice is to get an officer paper on the implications, and that we consider the implications of that in setting the 22-23 budget. So is that helpful? And maybe you would take that advice from Councillor Allison.
Thank you. Councillor Allison, response, please.
Yeah, very much where Cleland was there and where Margaret has indicated it was 2022 that I did state where that extra day's holiday would be taken. I'm not quite sure. I mean, Margaret's comments were regarding a discussion we had in leaders, which I'm not sure that it has any regard towards the motion here. And I'm not sure that Joe has actually changed anything. So I would be willing to withdraw if this motion was adapted, or what Councillor Cooper said had some level of or the word I'd be looking for, conformity to it, that it was the way forward. But we have a motion here in front of us that points 1 and 4 are not really acceptable. So it's either for or against that, yeah, I do think there are points there, and by adding in the day's holiday, looking at the possibility of a day's holiday, getting it costed and coming in and 2022 would be a way forward. But I would need clarity on the status of what Margaret was saying.
Provost, I would be happy to include that kind of request for that we examine that for the future in the document. What I don't want to do is replace the actual text that is there, but I'm happy again to try and get some support for this motion. I'm happy to ask that the request in the motion for a paper to be brought forward for on the lines Alec has outlined, but just I don't want to replace the content of what is actually quite a fundamental ask of the trade union. So I'm happy to include that as an additional line, for example, in that rewards local government workers section. In relation to the point about the living wage, again, this is quite a fundamental point for the trade unions, and although in South Lanarkshire is in a better place, we're not calling in South Lanarkshire to change our practices. We're simply associating ourselves with the campaign where it still has progress to make.
Okay, is that acceptable to Councillor Allison? Can I ask, please?
It's what adding in the extra words regarding. Can I hear Margaret Cooper for Councillor Cooper first?
Councillor Cooper.
Yeah, no, I'm not happy about Councillor Fagan adding that into his motion. I was going to bring a motion on behalf of the independent group to the council regarding the potential extra days holiday, and I saw that as something entirely different from this paper. It was a potential way of rewarding all staff in South Lanarkshire for the exceptional work that they've put in across the last year and possibly for the next year while we continue to run with this pandemic. Now, I agreed not to bring forward that motion on the basis that Cleland and Paul Manning both agreed to have a paper produced by Kay McVeigh to fully cost that proposition. And I gave an example of the year when West Lothian Council were Council of the Year and they were able to give all of their employees an extra day's holidays. So it is something that's not setting a precedent, it's something that's been done, it's doable. However, there's obviously a lot of small print involved in that in regard to people that might leave during the period, that might want to feel that they should be getting paid the money. This is not about money, this is about people that are in the employ of the council during this period who deserve to be recognised, and not necessarily about the £500 that was announced and posed great difficulty for some people from the Scottish Government. So I'm not happy about having this proposal of ours being subsumed into Councillor Fagan's plug the gap motion. I see it as something entirely different from that, and I'm quite prepared to put forward my own amendment to this paper where that necessary. So I'm asking that that is left out, and that is a matter that is dealt with at another time when the paper is prepared and might not necessitate us bringing it to a full council meeting. First and foremost, it could come before the executive committee and, if necessary, follow to a full council meeting. There are aspects of this motion that I've said already that I'm unhappy with. There's no mention of the fact that South Lanarkshire Council for many years have paid above the living wage. It's talking in generic terms about Scotland. It's South Lanarkshire Council we're talking about. We're not talking about the whole of Scotland. Yes, we support the trade unions and other local authorities, but first and foremost are the rights of our own trade unions in our own authority. And I agree with Robert Brown on the issue of how local government will shape up post-pandemic. I think everybody realises that for years the Scottish Government have been reshaping local government, and I'm sure that once the analysis of everything comes through in the future, there'll be a further attempt to reshape local government. So I'm not happy about that. It's local government that shapes local government to meet the demands of the local area. And you know, that's basically my comments at the moment, Provost. I'm not supporting this motion, and I'm not happy with the proposal to include an amendment regarding an extra day's holiday within it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ross.
Thanks very much, Provost. I would fully like to support Margaret Cooper in what she's just said. Margaret did bring it up at a leaders' meeting some time ago, and the idea was that before we did any more in this, we would get it fully costed. The idea that we actually discuss it today without it being fully costed seems to me a ridiculous situation. We wouldn't do that with anything else. Why we would do it with something, even though we're in favour of it? I think there's a proper route to take in this, and Margaret's already suggested this. So from that point of view, I don't think it should be included in any of the amendments today. Joe's motion, I know he's trying to now change it to get something else. It was another lazy Labour motion. It was put together without proper thought, and it really doesn't deserve our support today. Thanks very much, Provost.
Provost, is it? Can I? Well, I suppose maybe you want to indicate if Councillor Allison is helpful. Can I try to be helpful and maybe find a way forward? So, I mean, first of all, I'm just detecting a hostility to what I think is a perfectly reasonable motion, and a lot of frankly petty arguments being deployed against it. Can I say to Councillor Cooper, my intention, I understand my intention was not to bring a motion today raising the issue of a holiday for an additional holiday for staff in not this coming financial year, but the year after. It was Councillor Allison had suggested it as a potential addition to the motion. To take the substantive point that Councillor Ross made, I don't think the Council should be agreeing that kind of thing today. If the Council was going to agree that kind of thing today, one of the previous debates would have been the appropriate time to do it. If it is helpful to Councillor Allison, I'm happy to say as an additional point, it would be an additional paragraph, that in addition, the Council agrees that a paper be brought forward to the relevant committee to consider an additional day's holiday for Council workers. I don't think we should be committing ourselves without knowing the cost, if that was acceptable. But what I don't want to do is change the substance of the motion. In relation to the comments about the motion itself, can I just remind people this motion came from our trade. It's not a disgraceful, lazy motion. It came from the trade unions of this council, who I think have already been treated with some disdain by the other party leaders today, and they've been treated with disdain by the party leaders on some of their quite ignorant comments in relation to this debate. The changes I'm making to the motion, I am making in order to try and get consensus support for the motion in the council. Arguments being deployed against it, I think, as I say, are petty. I'm proposing, if people are concerned that it is dated, that we remove the preamble, that we remove the word therefore, that we the motion simply asks the council to pledge its support to the trade union campaign Plug the Gap, and calls on the Scottish Government to plug the gap in local government finance in 21-22 budget to meet all four of those points, which I think are relevant. This is about showing solidarity with people, an alien concept to some, and an additional paragraph is inserted that states, in addition, the council agrees that a paper be brought to the relevant committee to consider an additional day's holiday for council workers. So I would have thought that should have the support of Councillor Cooper, it should have the support of Councillor Allison, it should have the support of Councillor Ross. There is surely nothing, nobody can dispute the position on local government finance. I don't think anyone is against the fundamental aims of what the trade unions here are trying to achieve, and it is simply a way of finding a consensus position everyone can support in the council. And I think the reasons that are being deployed for not supporting that consensus position in the council are frankly some of the pettiest I've heard in the time that I've been here.
Thank you, Councillor Fagan. Councillor Allison, is that acceptable to you?
Well, what I was going to say, in light of what Councillor Cooper has said, a quick confirmation from the Chief Executive that the paper is being brought forward to look at this would be more than acceptable. Joe, I'm not quite sure in what you're actually proposing now, but I think I'm quite happy to go with Councillor Cooper's suggestion if Clarland can give us that assurance that a costed paper will be coming forward to show our appreciation to the staff, and on that basis I would withdraw the amendment.
Okay. Provost, just to be helpful then, we have been asked by the Budget Working Group to investigate that, produce a paper and bring it forward. The position as I understand it now then, Provost, just to recap, is that Councillor Fagan has made an adjustment to his motion which takes out the preamble, takes out the word therefore, leaves the 4 bullets as shown in the circulated papers, and adds a further bullet that says a paper to be brought to the relevant committee that considers the potential implications and cost of an additional day's annual leave in 2022. So you have at the moment this motion, which you could, subject to members' agreement, go to the vote for or against that amended motion. But there is no further amendment as we understand it. So it's either you support it or you're not in favour of it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Before we go to the vote, I'll hear from Councillor Walker, Cooper, and finally Councillor Campbell, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, I would support the motion. I think the trade union, it's coming from the trade unions, and I think they're quite right to be concerned in terms of future levels of funding, and they're quite right to say that yes, this budget is better than we thought it would be, but it comes nowhere near in terms of the efficiencies of 2 million that have been taken out of local government. And I certainly would echo the comments around the massive amount of work that has been done by local authority staff. I believe that should be recognised, though I'm happy to wait for the costing in terms of additional days holidays. And what I would say, one of the hardest working sections of staff must have been IT in terms of getting us where we are, in terms of being able to communicate, have meetings through Microsoft Teams, the work they've been tasked at looking at in relation to getting the public involved in meetings, which is still ongoing. So it's extremely unfortunate that we've just voted through a budget that cuts their full-time equivalent staff by 5. As a Labour group, we had a number of discussions with the trade unions over that, and they pleaded with us not to do that because of the stress and the impact of on existing staff that would have, and the cuts that have been getting made to IT over the years that have had a devastating impact on the service and on the staff. So it's extremely unfortunate that we have just passed a budget that's actually cut their staff by 5. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Thanks, Provost. Just following on from what Councillor Walker said, it is sad. It's sad that the Labour group felt that they didn't have the solidarity towards their constituents and our staff members to take part in an open and honest debate about the very points that you've raised about whether jobs are lost or whether these were vacant posts or what they were. If you're not at the table, you can't change. If you want to change, you change from within. And it's interesting that Joe regularly referred to insults. The independent group has always consulted with our union colleagues each year regarding the budget. And the very notion of bringing forward an extra day's holiday came about through discussion with union colleagues as a potential solution for the wider group of union members, rather than just simply those in social care. So there's no insult in people not agreeing with this motion. We strongly support our union colleagues, but this motion is not necessarily the way to do it on this particular occasion. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you. Finally, we'll hear from Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Provost. I just want to thank Alec for removing our amendment. I think Margaret spoke very well in respect of our employees. I think we should be rewarding our employees with something, because without a doubt they've gone above and beyond, and it's not just IT, and I think they've done a fantastic job as well, but all of our staff across the council, and I look forward to seeing a fully costed proposal. But thanks, Margaret. I think it was a well put together piece, and I'm happy to support it along with Alex Allison and the team.
Thank you very much. Can I ask the clerk now to prepare for the vote, please?
I think Clellan put it eloquently that the motion that was detailed in page 13 and 14 of your papers by Councillor Fagan, seconded by Councillor Cornbury, has been amended to take away the preamble, the therefore, all the 4 points still exist, and there's additional paragraph. The council would agree a paper to be brought to the relevant committee to consider an additional holiday for 2022, so that would be for the consideration of the relevant committee. I'm now going to read out your name, and you simply indicate whether you wish to vote for or against the motion. Councillor Allison?
Against.
Councillor Anderson?
Against.
Councillor Bradley?
Against.
Councillor Brogan?
For.
Councillor Brown?
Against.
Councillor Buchanan?
Against.
Councillor Burns? I know he wasn't there for the previous vote, so it's looking like Councillor Burns is not there. Councillor Callaghan?
Against.
Councillor Callaghan?
Against.
Councillor Campbell?
Against.
Councillor Carmichael?
For.
Councillor Chalmers?
Against.
Councillor Cornbury?
For.
Councillor Cooper?
Against.
Councillor Cowie?
For.
Councillor Craig?
Against.
Councillor Devlin?
For.
Councillor Donnelly?
Against.
Councillor Dorman?
Against.
Councillor Dryborough?
Against.
Councillor Fagan?
For. The workers.
Councillor Faulkner?
For.
Councillor Ferguson?
Against.
Councillor Fulton?
Against.
Councillor Gray?
Against.
Councillor Greenshields?
Against.
Councillor Hamilton?
For.
Councillor Harrow? Councillor Harrow? I'll come back to Councillor Harrow. I couldn't hear anything there. Councillor Holford?
Against.
Councillor Horn?
Against.
Councillor Horsham?
Against.
Councillor Hose?
Against.
Councillor LeBlond?
Against.
Councillor Lennon?
For.
Councillor Lockhart?
Against.
Councillor Logan?
For.
Councillor Loudon?
Against.
Councillor Lowe? Councillor Lowe, are you there? I'll come back to Councillor Lowe.
Hello.
Hello, Councillor Lowe.
Aye.
You voting for it?
Abstaining.
Oh, you're
This vote.
abstaining. Okay, no bother. Councillor McAdams? Councillor McAdams?
I'm sorry, I'm voting for the workers.
Okay. Provost?
Against.
Councillor McClymont?
For the workers and the unions, thank you.
Councillor McCreary?
Against.
Councillor MacDonald?
Against.
Councillor McGavigan?
Against.
Councillor McGeever?
Against.
Councillor McGuigan,
Against.
Councillor McLaughlin,
For the workers.
Councillor Marsh,
Against.
Councillor Miller,
Against.
Councillor Nealon,
Against.
Councillor Nelson,
Abstain.
Councillor Nugent,
Against.
Councillor Razak,
For.
Councillor Ross,
Against the motion.
Councillor Scott,
For.
Councillor Shearer,
Against.
Councillor Stevenson,
Against.
Councillor Thompson, Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, can you hear us now? For the workers. For.
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Walker,
For the workers.
Councillor Wardhall,
Against.
Councillor Wark,
Against.
Councillor Watson,
Against.
Councillor Wilson.
Against.
Okay, I'll just come back. I don't think Councillor Burns has rejoined us. Councillor Burns, Councillor Harrow. Councillor Harrow. Let's see if he's present. Okay, and I think that was all that I missed. I'll just do a tally, thanks.
Councillor Watson has his hand up.
I got Councillor Watson. It was Councillor Harrow that.
No, it's a point of order to the Provost.
Yes.
I'm not quite sure how the votes are being tallied, Provost, in so much that I think it's disrespectful of a number of councillors to be saying they're for the workers, but that means I'm not quite clear if they're for or against the motion. I think you'll find the majority, as if not all councillors, are for the workers. Maybe a pedantic point, but I think it's a childish point being made by some of our fellow councillors when they can't just say for the motion or are against the motion. They seem to have to think that they've got the priority on the rights of workers.
Thank you for your input. It wasn't a point of order, Councillor Watson, but thank you for your input. Councillor Donnelly, you want to say something?
I just supported what Councillor Watson was saying. It was actually offending me.
Okay, thank you. Susan Summerall.
Yes, there was 17 votes for the motion and 42 votes against the motion, and we had 2 abstentions. The motion therefore falls.
Thank you very much indeed. Let's move on to item 5, independent review of adult social care, pages 15 to 30 in your papers, and can I invite the Chief Executive to speak to this report, please.
Okay, thank you, Provost. And on a day of important papers, this is another significant paper before Council. I'll try to present a reasonable summary of what is a very complicated and detailed underpinning document. But members will be aware, Provost, that the Scottish Government commissioned a review, an independent review into adult social care in Scotland around about September with a very tight timeline. The review was chaired and led by Derek Feely, who's a former NHS Scotland Chief Executive, and he was supported by an advisory group of colleagues from a clinical or academic background to support his work. And he, over the course of the subsequent couple of months, had an extensive programme of engagement with all relevant stakeholders. The remit given to the review was relatively broad in its terms, but to recommend improvements to adult social care in Scotland. And when given the Commission, he was given a steer that the government would wish to move towards a human rights-based approach to the delivery of service, and to move away from what we currently have, which is predominantly a needs-led approach. However, the remit of the review was about adult social care and not the full breadth of health and social care and the interconnectivity in the system. The piece of work that has been produced and now published uses extensively the lived experience of service users, carers and other stakeholders, those who work in the sector as well. And the description of the challenges in adult social care and the frustrations with the current system come clearly from that lived experience and that testimony, and is probably recognised and endorsed and supported by all social care professionals that work in our sector or in the voluntary and third sector. These are well-known and long-held concerns about and frustrations within that system. Equally, the review document points to a series of outcomes that align very closely with what this council has previously endorsed, and also COSLA, representing all 32 authorities, have endorsed. Some issues, therefore, lie in that central ground of how do you get from the current system to deliver those outcomes. So I will pick out from quite a detailed piece of work just a few observations that may help members with the consideration of this paper. But there are a large number of findings within the paper, and it led to 53 separate recommendations, as I said, wrestled with over a considerable period of time by those who work in the sector or who receive services. The challenges around needs assessment, care planning and the rationing of care to those in the greatest need underpin a lot of those frustrations. And over a period of time, as we've had an ageing population and where the needs and the frailties, particularly of our older age group, have presented additional pressures and financial pressures to the system, we've seen to match with the limited funding that's been available, we've seen a further restriction on the services that can be provided, to the extent that it really does now represent critical and substantial need only. We point in the document to the fact that many of the drivers around social care actually sit in the wider health and social care system, and the current legislative landscape and the financial envelope that constrains the work that is done within the sector. A number of the recommendations do, however, reflect work already taken forward by this council and by COSLA, and in particular we flag up within the paper our commitments to the Fair Work principles and to ensuring that there is a sustainable and valued workforce in social care. The review report then indicates that in the belief of the review group that structural change is necessary to make those changes. And I'll go on in a second just to signpost some of that. But it does also indicate, although this was about adult social care, some of those structural changes, there are some comments within the document that further alludes to the potential for children's services and criminal justice social work, the other two areas, to be at some point in the future considered under the remit of reformed integration joint boards. The review recommends that a national care service be established, and that would see accountability for social care support move from councils to the Scottish Government and discharged through reformed integrated joint boards. It rejects in its consideration the concept of a national care service, including the nationalisation of all third sector or private care businesses, and it goes into some detail about why that proposal is neither viable nor financially deliverable. The review considered that of itself wouldn't improve outcomes for individuals and would unnecessarily take resource away from the sector and take a lot of attention away from the delivery of improvements. So turning to the central tenet of the report, as I mentioned, the proposals would be that local authorities would no longer be responsible for adult social care commissioning and the procurement of works. It does indicate that local authorities could continue to be the provider of services through our care at home services, our housing support, our care homes, etc., but not the commissioners. It talks about the integrated joint boards being reformed and for voting rights to be extended to all members of the integrated joint boards. And we know that there's a relatively large full membership. At the moment, voting rights are shared equally between members of NHS Lanarkshire's board and from South Lanarkshire Council, but the influence of the council would be diminished as all members of the integrated joint boards would receive equal voting rights. The review notes the distinction between social care and social work services, the statutory element that at the moment supports assessment and care planning. And it does, however, note that there may be a future intention for the integrated joint board to commission those services. It would determine what it requires from those statutory services and would commission them from local government. Probably the biggest single change in the forward view that is proposed by the review document is that there would be a significant investment estimated by the review group at £660 million, or 0.66 of £1 billion, which would be a different scale of investment. It represents around about a 20% increase in social care budgets. And that would support the move towards the rights-based approach and moving towards greater early intervention, early provision of support and preventative work. In terms of the finance proposals within the review document, the review recommends that budgets should be determined nationally and distributed directly to integration joint boards by the Scottish Government and not come through either the NHS budget or the local authority budget. The review also indicates ways and a number of different models for government to consider as to how they would fund those proposals, but predominantly relating to changes in the approach to taxation. Other recommendations that align within the report, as I mentioned, a decisive shift towards prevention, greater integration of public services at a local level driven by better partnerships, collaboration and effective local delivery, and a key tenet to view that the money that's spent on adult social care should be viewed as an investment in our local economy and an investment in our communities through the enhanced rates of pay and the increased commissioning of services in those economies. The human rights approach is a particularly important change in direction, and that would set out a series of rights that people would be entitled to regardless of any assessment of need, and therefore that would dictate an increased quantum of service provision and dictate the increased financial contribution. So I'm not going to read this report to members, I'm jumping into just a couple of other key areas. So in terms of taking forward an ethical, fair approach to commissioning and procurement, that must form the cornerstone of any future contractual relationships. These are important points for us, and we would want to ensure that the delivery of those sets of outcomes is something that we could achieve. It has been debated within COSLA in some detail, and the current position for COSLA, as noted in Appendix 2, is that we can make significant progress on a number of these outcomes, particularly if the funding is made available to local government and local partnerships, but we could do so without structural change, and we could do so with having appropriate regard to local democratic influence and local democratic accountability. So, Provost, there is an appendix there that shows the full 53 recommendations in Appendix 1, along with the COSLA position in Appendix 2. I would only, before winding up, note that the Scottish Parliament have debated the Feely report, and there has been some, I think, pretty well cross-party commendation for the piece of work that's been done, for the description of the challenges that are in the current system, which I think are widely recognised. There is a great deal of cross-party support for the outcomes to be achieved. Where there is a division is on the steps that are taken to achieve those kind of outcomes. So, Provost, if I can go back to page 15 of the pack for members, just to note for today's recommendations, for members to note the proposed establishment of a national care service, that the Council would be no longer responsible for adult social care, including the commissioning and procurement of adult social care support, but could continue to provide social care services commissioned by the reformed integrated joint boards, and that the reformed integrated joint boards would enable them to hold for the boards to hold assets, employ staff, enter into contracts directly, take full responsibility for the commissioning and procurement of adult social care support, and that they'd be funded directly by and accountable directly to the Scottish Government if these recommendations were accepted. And then secondly, to agree that further reports will be presented once the Scottish Government outlines its response, its formal response to the recommendations. And this work, I would imagine, Provost, will take centre stage over the next couple of years. This is a very significant paper. But happy to take any questions from members, or you may wish to take comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carl. And before I invite questions and comments, I'm aware that Councillor Brown has advised an amendment to the recommendations. Do you have a seconder, Councillor Brown?
Yes, I do. It will be Councillor McGeever.
Okay. I wonder if you could circulate to members via the paperclip function, please.
It's been given to the clerk, so hopefully Susan can do the necessary with regard to that.
Yes, I'll do that. Councillor Brown, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Brown.
Thank you very much, Provost. Can I thank as well the Chief Executive for the introduction, which I think was very comprehensive one for some of the issues which are quite complex in this particular report. Now, the amendment itself is fairly lengthy, as people will see when it comes round. It's been circulated round, and prior intimation was given to group leaders and to the Chief Executive yesterday. I'm not a particular fan, I should say, of the way in which the review by Derek Feely was done. It had a fairly short time compass for such a complex issue. And as is noted in the report and in our amendment, the advisory group did not contain any representatives from local government, from COSLA, from Solace, or from Social Work Scotland. Now, that may have contributed to what I would suggest is an ill-supported and fallacious conclusion, namely that adult social care should be removed from local government and centralised in an Edinburgh quango, or maybe a Stirling quango, but a quango in any event, an outcome which Liberal Democrats would suggest is bad for the recipients of social care and bad for local government. Now, Provost, we've been here before. It's not that long ago since Liberal Democrats opposed the centralisation of the police and the emergency services, a position in which we've since been joined by others. Since I joined this council, we've seen proposals for the roads function to be centralised, for education services to be more centrally controlled, and of course the halfway house of the integrated joint boards. We previously lost economic development functions, and in England, this process has gone even further. Now, the acid test of all these things is what works. I wouldn't oppose such a reform if I thought for 1 minute it would produce a better outcome for people in need. The report identifies the core challenges and the need for additional resources. Those inclusions are entirely valid and helpful, but frankly don't take an Einstein to arrive at. These are, in fact, the core issues, and a complex and destabilising restructuring is not what we need. People with experience in this area may well vote on this later in accordance with party instructions, but I'm in no doubt that they well know that centralisation is not indeed the answer. I hope that people will be brave enough to say so. Now, of course, this is only the first stage. The report has been debated, as the Chief Executive mentioned, in the Scottish Parliament and will be properly considered by the new Parliament after the elections in May. But I think it's actually very important that this Council lays down a marker at this stage of what I hope will be the Council's opposition to the proposed centralised National Care Service, which indeed I think is a distraction from the other core and good recommendations in the report. None of that, of course, should prevent us taking up and supporting these other elements of the report, but the core demand is, as often, funding. I doubt if anyone, after the experience of the pandemic, would not applaud the paying of a real living wage to social care staff, the extension of free personal care introduced by Liberal Democrats and Labour in government in Scotland to full non-residential care support and to proper support for unpaid carers, not least in respite. Many of us know, I think, from casework and other contacts, these things are often subject to long delays. And I think we very much support as well a human rights approach to this area. Adult social care has suffered from demographic challenges, from low pay, and sometimes from low standards and changing expectations. It does require more funding, it does require better quality, it does require higher standards, and it does require a national aspiration to improve provision across the country. It does not require the bureaucracy and inflexibility of a national care service. And I say in passing that Derek Feely should know something about that as a former chief executive of the NHS in Scotland. Adult care is local in nature. It links with housing services, community support, community groups and local health and mental health services. It does not fit naturally with secondary or tertiary health. It's not easily organised across the country. It's not helped by the dead hand of St Andrew's House. It's not something to add to the empire of Jean Freeman or her successors. And I note in passing that the Scottish Government target that no one in the NHS should have to wait more than 6 weeks for a diagnostic test in the NHS has not been met for a decade. And that's something which should give us pause for concern when we look at relatively simplistic solutions to complex challenges. Provost, let's today mark our support for flexible, local, but well-funded and high-quality adult social care services. Tell the Scottish Government that we're not up for another ministerial power grab of services which are best run locally. The track record of centralisation is not an inspiring one to follow. I move the Liberal Democrat amendment. Thank you very much, Provost.
Thank you. Before we move on, can I ask if anybody's moving the recommendations of the report?
Good question.
Provost.
Sorry, who's that?
Councillor Chalmers.
Councillor Chalmers.
Yes, hi. Can I move the report, please?
Okay. Seconder?
I'm happy to second that, Provost. Councillor Craig.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor John Bradley.
Thanks, Provost, and thanks, Cleland, for the synopsis, quite comprehensive. But the report itself is quite a lengthy report, and it will take some time to digest. We shouldn't make assumptions or jump to conclusions, as Robert has sort of indicated, that it's all the fault of centralisation and all that. I'd just like to make a wee quote from the overview of Feely at the very beginning and how he was commissioned and directed to take the human rights approach. The principal aim of the review was to recommend improvements to adult social care in Scotland, primarily in terms of the outcomes achieved by and with people who use the services, their carers and families, and the experience of people who work in adult social care. The review, as Cleland indicated, took a human rights approach. Nothing about us without us springs to mind. With that thought, I note this report and make two suggestions. Firstly, we request a member seminar or briefing to gain a full understanding of how these recommendations were reached and the outcomes they hope to achieve. Secondly, we proactively seek to influence the shaping of the governance of any new service. The Feely report is a report with recommendations. Let's take time to understand those voices of lived experience of people who work in social care and be part of the change. Thanks, Provost.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bradley. Councillor Margaret Walker, please.
Thanks, Provost. And just to say thanks, Cleland. I tried to plough through it all, and you gave us a very succinct picture there, and so did the report that went out with the papers. I would like to. The Labour Group is supporting Robert's amendment, so I'm not going to repeat much of what Robert said. But I would certainly echo that structural change very seldom improves outcomes. I mean, the intention of the review is excellent, and certainly the investment of 0.660 billion would achieve the standard and level of care in a human rights-based approach. Because what the report does highlight, it echoes the problems that the Labour Group have highlighted in relation to self-directed support, and that it is needs-led, which has really been the cause of our concerns around a lot of service redesign based on shifting to self-directed support. So we absolutely welcome that, but unfortunately, with a structural change like that, your time tends to get taken away from improving services to actually implementing the change, and it doesn't guarantee better outcomes at the end. I was also surprised in relation to new budget arrangements that are proposed. The whole idea of having flexible budgets was that they came under the local authority and within the integrated joint boards, although there are issues with that. If you're now going to separate out that budget again, you're going to have the Scottish Government commissioning services from a workforce that's based within the local authority, then there are degrees upon degrees of complexity there that I think are unnecessary. Local government is more than capable of providing services to the standards outlined with that level of investment within a locally accountable setting through local government. There's nothing in that report that we haven't raised and talked about, including workforce development, for care staff and social work staff. We have long said that that is an issue. There has to be career paths, there has to be decent salaries, there has to be recognition for work. There's nothing in there that local authorities cannot do. And we can look at the mixed economy, we can look at the providers, we can do all of that within a local government setting. To centralise it creates more bureaucracy, creates more difficulties, and doesn't achieve what we want to do in terms of a gold standard of care at the end of the day. So on that basis, the Labour Group would support the amendment that Councillor Brown has put forward. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Graham Campbell, please.
Sorry, Provost, just trying to come off mute there at the moment. Yeah, I think what Robert's saying is very applicable here. One thing I would like to say is, obviously being from Northern Ireland, where health and personal social care services is in one department, one centralised department, and it can work. If you were bringing forward children's services here, I would be absolutely against centralisation, because without education being part of it, it is completely broken in Northern Ireland. However, what makes me very concerned about centralising social work in Scotland is the utter proven failure of the SNP Scottish Government so far in centralising services. And the police, for me, is a classic example. It hasn't worked, in my opinion. And I just cannot, in my heart, support the centralisation of social work services at this stage, because it just has other centralised or central grabs by the SNP government in Scotland haven't worked, and I'm not sure we can support that part of it. So on that being, I was going to ask Robert if he would think about changing some of the words in item 7 there to being concern about the Scottish government's centralisation approach, but I'm not sure, given your passion in this one, Robert, you would agree to that one. So I'm probably not going to make that suggestion.
Thank you. I'll take Councillor McKeever, followed by Councillor Cooper. Councillor McGeever.
Hi, can you hear me now? Is that any better?
Yep, that's it.
Sorry about that. Just to confirm, Provost, that I'm seconding Robert's amendment, and to I don't want to repeat the excellent points that have been made by Robert or by Councillor Walker either, actually. But I think we've got plenty of evidence now that centralisation comes with all sorts of downsides. It causes real problems for staff, and it doesn't provide clear benefits at all for service users. By concentrating decision-making power at the top, you take it further away from the frontline workforce and the people that they serve. You remove local decision-making, and that can throw staff into limbo. Determining budgets could easily end up compromising staff roles, their conditions, making them unclear. Now, having worked for a regional public service that was merged into a national one in 2012-2013, I can honestly say that I don't know a single worker who thought that it made their jobs easier, that it made the service they provide the public better, or that it made them happy. In fact, it made them utterly miserable. And nor did it offer any benefits for the people of Hamilton, for South Lanarkshire, for the west of Scotland, or most of the rest of the country. Except that there's some talk from COSLA about, the need to put in local accountability to it. But I doubt that you can ever take a new national service, that you can transfer powers from the local level to national and still have meaningful local empowerment and accountability. I think, Provost, for that reason, if we believe in local decision-making, local accountability, local democracy, then we should be very wary of taking control away from local councillors, locally elected and accountable officials, and instead handing it to government-appointed bureaucrats and quangos sitting in Edinburgh or elsewhere. I think that is really not the route that the country should be taking, and for that reason, I hope that this council would say so today.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Yes, thanks. I would like to endorse Councillor Brown's motion and to agree with the remarks that were made by Councillor Walker and Councillor McGeever. There's no point in reiterating those. I don't particularly favour the notion of decisions being taken away from a local level. We spend a lot of time in our council discussions. Recently, we've spent even more time talking about how important it is to consult with our community and have decision making at a local level. And here we have a proposal to remove it from a local level and to centralise it. And I agree with the points that centralisation doesn't always work. I'm concerned about accountability. There's strong accountability at a local level, as we've seen with inspection reports that are carried out regularly by different agencies on the council, and we have to take action in regard to those, and to take that accountability away and place it at a central level where people find it impossible to reach those at the other end of the decision-making tree would be totally wrong. I spent years in education and we never ever succeeded in a smooth transition from young people with adult social care needs, young people moving from education into the adult social care needs section. That's never been mastered at a local level. And here, that's a simple example of how we would be proposing to take that away from the local level, bad enough as it is at the moment, and move it away to a central level where parents and carers feel completely disassociated from their local council and the people that they work with on a regular basis. For those reasons, I would encourage the independent group to support Robert's motion today. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take Councillor Fagan now and then ask Councillor Brown to sum up, please.
Yeah, thank you, Provost. I think I alluded earlier to the rather lawyerly wording of some of the propositions that Councillor Brown puts in front of us, and I have to say, I think on the basis of that wording, we can support the motion or the amendment. The starting point for Labour has to be, we have long campaigned for a national care service, and we have long campaigned for quite fundamental reform. I think there are two tensions, that as we take this issue forward, I think we're going to have to resolve. Today, the debate has understandably focused on the tension between centralisation and local decision making, but there is another tension, and that is the tension between the market and public provision. Now, I don't think anyone would accept that at this stage that those issues are fully resolved, but I do think there is a way of providing what is national service standards, a national service in a national expectation, but actually ensuring there is still a role for local decision making. And I think that the wording that Robert has used, I think, allows us to resolve it, because what we're fighting back against, I think, is excessive centralisation that could ultimately prove counterproductive. I also have to say I'm concerned about the blurred lines around IJB accountability, and actually that's absolutely something that would have to be resolved if we were to make any changes in this direction. And the other point around the tension between the market and public provision, I do think it is an important principle to start from, that there's too much money leaking out of the care system, leaking into corporate profits and leaking into tax havens in some cases that could actually be reinvested in people's frontline care. The paper very helpfully provides at the end of the paper a motion that went to, or an amendment I should say, that went to COSLA leaders supported by the Labour and SNP groups. And the end of that motion refers to the COSLA blueprint for local government. And I think this is the reassurance that members need, that wherever we are on the issue, that actually the amendment submitted is something that we can support in that cross-party spirit that I usually am known for. It states that the discussions on the future of social care have centred on the potential creation of a national care service. This can mean many different things to different people. Moving towards a national care service should not merely be accepted as the necessary means of reform without proper consideration of its scope, resourcing, and vitally, and I think this is the crucial point, its implications for local decision making. Any national care service must be locally empowered, reflect the needs of our communities, and recognise the vital role of the third sector. Now, as somebody who supports a national care service, I'm comfortable with that sentiment. I don't think as we sit here we know quite what the complexion of the future of these services will be. But I think that the laying down a marker, I think was the term that was used earlier, I think that's quite a wise thing to do for local government to do at this point in the process, and hopefully we can develop a system that does, when it comes to care, put the interests of the people who need that care before profit.
Thank you, Councillor Fagan. Councillor Brown, do you want to sum up before we go to the vote, please?
Yes, I'll just say a couple of words on this, Provost, if I may. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the contributions to colleagues as well. I think it's been quite an interesting and productive debate. I would suggest that the idea from John Bradley of a members' seminar is in fact taken up. I think that's a good thing we can do, not only do the motion per se, but I'm sure that will be a very useful facility for us gaining greater understanding of what is a complex report. I would like to commend, if I may, Councillor Fagan and Councillor Walker's comments in particular, partly because I was slightly surprised from the direction of travel that they came from, given that, as Joe has touched on, the Labour Party's long support for a national care service. I think there's maybe a wee bit of tension there in what that actually means as you tease it out. But I think Joe's contribution was a thoughtful one and did spot the particular issues that we need to bring out of this debate. Nobody, I think, is against national standards, particularly. National expectations, I think, are right as well. There are issues around how exactly you fund these things, and there are certainly issues about the accountability of the IJB. Indeed, Margaret Cooper touched on the accountability issue as well. So I think out of all these matters, there are concerns, I think, about a major structural reorganisation of the sector. I think right across the board there are concerns about that, echoed in the COSLA paper as well. That shouldn't lose us track of the important contribution that the report makes in other respects. And I think what we need to do as the debate goes forward, which will be over a period into the new period of the Scottish Parliament, is to continue that debate, to try and firm up, if you like, our feelings about exactly the best way to take these things forward, but against the background that, other things being equal, I think is maybe the way to put it. Normally, I think one would regard local provision of services like this as being the default position. And I think the case for centralisation has to be on those who make it, not on those who seek to defend the alternative. The outcome at the end of the day should be better provision for local people affected by these services. And I'm very clear in my own mind that has got to be based on a local structure and local approach. But thank you very much for the comments, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on this one, Provost.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brown. Susan, can you take us to the vote, please?
Yes, certainly. The motion is as per the recommendations in page 15 of your papers, and it's been moved by Councillor Chalmers, seconded by Councillor Craig. The amendment is as circulated to you, and that's by Councillor Brown and seconded by Councillor McGeever. When I read out your name again, Sorry. Could you, when I read out your name, can you please indicate whether you wish to vote for the motion or amendment? Councillor Allison.
Amendment.
Councillor Anderson.
Motion.
Councillor Bradley.
Motion.
Councillor Brogan.
Amendment.
Councillor Brown.
Amendment.
Councillor Buchanan.
Motion.
Councillor Callacase.
Motion.
Councillor Callaghan.
Motion.
Councillor Campbell.
Amendment.
Councillor Carmichael.
Amendment.
Councillor Chalmers.
Motion.
Councillor Convery.
Amendment.
Councillor Cooper.
Amendment.
Councillor Cowie.
Amendment.
Councillor Craig.
Motion.
Councillor Devlin.
Amendment.
Councillor Donnelly. Councillor Donnelly.
Motion.
Councillor Dorman.
Motion.
Councillor Dryborough. Councillor Dryborough.
Councillor Dryborough's had to leave the meeting, I'm afraid.
Okay, thanks, Councillor McGeever. Councillor Fagan.
Amendment.
Councillor Faulkner.
Amendment.
Councillor Ferguson.
Motion.
Councillor Fulton.
Motion.
Councillor Gray.
Motion.
Councillor Hamilton.
Amendment.
Councillor Harrow.
Amendment.
Councillor Halford.
Amendment.
Councillor Horn.
Motion.
Councillor Horsham.
Motion.
Councillor Hose.
Amendment.
Councillor LeBlond.
Amendment.
Councillor Lennon.
Amendment.
Councillor Lockhart.
Amendment.
Councillor Logan.
Amendment.
Councillor Loudon.
Motion.
Councillor Lowe. Councillor Lowe.
I think he's left the meeting,
I think he's
Susan.
left, okay. Councillor MacDonald.
Motion.
Councillor Marsh.
Motion.
Councillor McAdams.
Amendment.
Provost.
Motion.
Councillor McClymont.
Amendment.
Councillor McCreary.
Amendment.
Councillor McGavigan.
Amendment.
Councillor McGeever.
Amendment.
Councillor McGuigan.
Motion.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Amendment.
Councillor Miller.
Motion.
Councillor Nealon.
Amendment.
Councillor Nelson.
Amendment.
Councillor Nugent.
Motion.
Councillor Razak.
Amendment.
Councillor Ross.
Motion.
Councillor Scott.
Amendment.
Councillor Shearer.
Motion.
Councillor Stevenson.
Motion.
Councillor Thompson. Councillor Thompson. Okay, I'll come back. Councillor Walker.
Amendment.
Councillor Wardhall.
Amendment.
Councillor Wark.
Amendment.
Councillor Watson.
Amendment.
Councillor Wilson.
Motion.
Councillor Thompson. Councillor Thompson, it looks as if you're still present.
Yes, I'm here. Amendment. Can you hear us okay?
I can hear you now, thank you.
Amendment, thank you.
Okay, thanks. I'll just tally up. There was 25 for the motion and 34 for the amendment. The amendment is therefore declared carried.
Thank you very much indeed, Susan. Thank you very much. Can I thank everybody for today's meeting. I have no urgent business. Take care, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, Provost.
Thanks,
Thank
Provost.
you, Provost.
Thank you, Provost.
Thanks,
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Provost.
Thanks, Provost.
Thank you, Provost.
Thank you.